So, this is the best part as far as I'm concerned. We're doing the gravy, but we're gonna make the stock first. I'm a gravy sauce fanatic, so to me it's all about the gravy because you can put the gravy on everything. So what we're gonna do is take the bones that we saved from the turkey, and we're gonna make a nice, rich, brown turkey stock. And then from that stock, we're gonna go ahead and make the gravy. And when we get to the gravy, I'll show you how to get a really perfectly smooth, really nice tasting gravy, no lumps, not pasty, not runny, no, not nothing. I don't know, can you say that? Not nothing, except good. So let's start with the stock first. And for that, we've got, like I say, the reserved turkey bones. We've got some mushrooms that we'll get to later, and that's gonna be for the gravy part. We've got some onion, carrot, and celery, the usual suspects for the stock itself. Some garlic. We have all of the herbs, basically, that we put in the herb butter, except the parsley. I didn't put any parsley in there. You can if you want. Some soy sauce, just to give a little umami and to color the stock a bit. And then for the gravy portion of it, some flour and butter, because we're gonna make a brown roux. I am actually using some chicken stock that I already had. Now, you can use water. There's nothing wrong with it. You can use half water and half chicken stock. I use 1/3 less sodium canned chicken stock. I kind of like it, if I have enough, is to use stock completely with the bones. And you end up getting what's called a double stock or double concentrated stock, because now you get that base flavor of whatever you're using with the bones, and it just comes even richer and yummier and everything else. A little bit of oil for roasting, some Madeira or sherry for the mushrooms later, and a little bit of white wine for deglazing the roasting pan. So first, we're gonna get to the bouquet garni, fancy name for an herb packet. So I've got the sage, I've got the savory, I've got the rosemary, and some thyme. Now, you can put bay leaf in here. I really like fresh bay leaf for this, but I couldn't find any, and I don't happen to have any dried. Don't tell anybody. So I'm not using any. So what I'm gonna do is just sort of pile them up in the middle, and I've got them sort of going left to right. And then I am going to fold over. You can put peppercorns too. You can. Some people even put their garlic in there, but I'm not going to do that. Roll it up, bring the ends together, right? Take some cotton string. Don't use anything that's, you know, poly blah, 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 because it's going to end up melting in your stock. And last I looked, plastic doesn't taste very good in sauce. Cut off the excess, and that's ready to throw into the pot once we get to that point. So what I'm going to do first is cut up some onion. Now this is probably going to simmer, I'd say, for an hour. So I don't want the pieces too small, okay? So I'd say something like that would be good. Now, you can put less. I tend to like a little bit more onion in my stock. And I'm gonna put some carrot. Now, the carrot doesn't have to be cut in any particular way, other than, you know, knowing you're gonna cook it for about an hour, so you don't want it to completely break down. So I'm just gonna cut it into discs, yay big. And you'll notice when I did this, I started them a little thinner on the wider end and then wider on the thinner end, right? So that volume-wise, they're about the same. You don't want to put too much carrot because that will make your sauce or your stock really, really sweet. So I'm going to put just 2 small carrots or 1 large carrot. I'm going to try some celery. And that's our mirepoix. And we're going to set that aside because we need to start. Them bones, them turkey bones. Just get them in there. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and you can cut the larger pieces down further with a cleaver, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, and it depends on my mood, because you end up getting more surface area. The more surface area you get in something like this, the more you extract more flavor, more of the natural gelatins and collagen and all that stuff. And then we're going to drizzle with some neutral oil. No need to use, like, you know, extra virgin or anything expensive in this because you're not going to taste it. Now this as awful as it looks, is going to make a really, really, really tasty sauce. But you have to brown it first because we're making a brown stock. So this is going to go into a 450 degree oven until the top, right, starts to brown. And then we're going to toss it once and to sort of mix it, right? So the other side or sides turn brown as well. You want a really rich brown. Before you then add the vegetables, we're going to sprinkle the vegetables on top and throw it back in the oven and brown the vegetables, and then put that into the pot. So let's stick this guy in the oven. So I've had the bones in a 450 degree oven for about a half an hour, and I've been tossing them here and there. And this is what we've got. You can see they're really nice and brown. Okay, and I'm just going to leave that oil in there for now. Don't worry about it. We'll get to that. And now here's the veggies that we had from earlier, and I'm just going to strewn them about. Now this goes back in the oven until the veggies start to actually blacken a little bit around the edges. And it's fine. It's perfectly fine. But we'll see that when it comes up. So put those back in. I think it's time to take this out of the oven. Oh, yeah. There now. Look at that. Really dark brown. You've got, see, this is what I mean. Some of the vegetable edges, right, are going to start turning a little black, but that's fine. We don't have a lot of it, right? It's not burned. But that's what we're looking for. That is what's going to give our stock that nice, rich, deep flavor. I'm just loosening this up. We're going to dump it into a stock pot. Just dump everything in there. And then we want to take some white wine to deglaze. Get off as much as you can, but don't worry about all of it. Just as much as you can. And then we're going to go ahead and pour all of that. Okay, that looks absolutely horrible, which is exactly the way you want it, because that means you're going to get a lot of flavor. If it looks absolutely pristine, you've done something wrong, you need to put it back in the oven. It's got to be really nice and rich and brown with a little bit of darkening here and there and black. That's going to be flavor. So now at this point, we're going to add some garlic and, I don't know, to taste, but don't add too much. Now I'm adding whole cloves, so it's not going to be as intense in flavor. If you crush them up or you chop them and put them in there at that point, then you're really going to get some garlic out of that. But I'm putting them in whole, so it's not going to be nowhere near as intense. Bouquet garni. Some soy sauce for umami and some brown. And the chicken stock that I was talking about earlier. Now, as a rule of thumb, you always want your liquid to just come up to the top, right? And again, right, if you don't have that, you can use water. You can use water and low sodium chicken stock. And look at that brown color already, right? Isn't that nice? So now we're going to turn this thing on. We're going to bring it to a boil. I'm going to put a lid on it and simmer it. I would say for me, about 45 minutes to an hour. And then at that point, we're going to go ahead and strain it, and we're going to have this beautiful stock that we're going to make our mushroom gravy from. Okay, the stock has been simmering for about an hour. I wish you could smell it in here. This whole house smells really good, which is the way it should smell around Thanksgiving, right? So let me show you what we've got. So we can see that the bones have started to sort of like separate. And the carrots and everything, they haven't mushed up to nothing, right? They still held their shape, which is what you want. But that's looking really good. So now, what we're gonna do is I've got 2 sets of straining equipment set up here. So we're gonna have to strain it into a colander, get out all those big chunks, and then we'll take that stock and we'll strain it through a fine mesh sieve, and that will be our stock. Then to make the gravy, before I add the stock to the gravy, I'm gonna put it through this separator. If you don't have one of these separators, you gotta get one. I mean, I remember when these first came out, I won't tell you when, but I remember when they first came out. It didn't look anything like this. These are really cool. You'll see the stock and the fat separate. The fat floats, and then you hit this little button and all the pure stock comes out there, so you don't have any fat in your stock, and thus in your gravy, except for the fat you want. Anyway, so here we go. The way I do it to start is I sort of take out some of the big chunks first, so that way when they come out of the pot, they don't splash all over the place. Now that we have pretty much all the big pieces out, we're going to go ahead and pour that into the colander. Now I got to tell you, yes, it's a little involved making homemade stock, but it's really, 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 no, seriously, I mean really worth it. Yes, you can use just canned chicken stock, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not going to compare. Now we're going to move over to this guy. See, we get all those little bits out of there. And then we have our nice, rich turkey stock. Okay, so at the end of the day, I like to have way too much gravy because I don't think you could ever have way too much gravy. So this looks like it's making about 4 to 5 cups or so due to some reduction while we were doing it. So I'm gonna make up the difference with a little bit of chicken stock from the can, but we've got some amazing flavor here. So I'm gonna end up having 8 cups or 2 quarts of stock to make our gravy. Okay, it's stupid hot time. We all know what that means. Getting your pan as ridiculously hot as you can. So I got a really large skillet here. It doesn't need to be nonstick because we're gonna make a mushroom gravy. Now, if you don't wanna make a mushroom gravy, completely ignore this part, but I kinda like a mushroom gravy. So we're gonna get the pan stupid hot because these are mostly water. And if that's not hot enough, then the mushrooms start to steam. So we want evaporation to start as soon as they hit the pan. So I'm looking for smoke. We got the shimmering already, right? Oil starts to shimmer and then at some point it starts to smoke. So now I can see the smoke. Trust me on this, I see the smoke. And that's all you need. I've got the mushrooms that we had earlier. I just gave them a rough, coarse chop. We don't want to do like a really fine chop, and just stick them in there. Get some salt on there. I can already smell the mushrooms starting to caramelize. Okay, now, as you can see, the mushrooms have released all their water, right? So at this point, I like to add a little bit of white wine for the acid and some Madeira for the flavor. Now, this is not as sweet as say like a cream sherry or something like that. You can use a dry sherry if you want. You can even use port if you want. For me, I wouldn't put port in there, but you can. But I'm using a very good Madeira. Don't skimp when it comes to Madeira. Go ahead and get the real Madeira. Don't get, if it's like $3.99 or $6.99 for a bottle, it's not the real stuff because you'll put it in there and then you won't taste it. It's pretty much, I don't know, colored water. I'm going to let it reduce a little bit, but I'm not going to cook it until it's totally dry. I'm just going to let it reduce by, I don't know, about half or so. And then I'm going to move it aside and we'll start the gravy. We could probably end up doing an entire episode just on roux alone because there's a whole gamut of roux. But what we're going to be doing today for our purposes is we're going to be making a brown, or what is referred to sometimes as a peanut butter roux. There's no peanut butter in it. It's just because it ends up looking like the color of peanut butter. But what you end up starting with for this one is butter. You can use oil, you can use lard, You can use duck fat. You can use whatever you want. Depends on the recipe, right? So like in Cajun Creole cuisine and whatnot, they use oil. Now, this looks like a lot of butter, and it is. Here's something to keep in mind. When you're making a roux, if you're doing like a bechamel or a velouté, or you're doing like even a chowder, right? I mean, in essence, that's sort of like a roux base, or anything that's going to be sort of on the whiter side or the lighter side or the blonde side. You end up throwing the flour in, right? And you whisk it around for like a minute or two, and then you add the milk or the stock or whatever. That kind of roux that's not browned has a lot more thickening power than a roux that's, say, brown or dark brown. So we actually have to use more roux since we're going to be making this brown. Okay, so we have 1 cup or 16 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and then we have 1 cup, so equal amounts, or 16 tablespoons of just all-purpose flour. I always like the way that looks when it goes in. Isn't that cool? If we cook it a little longer, and we will, it'll take on just a little bit of color, and it'll go from a white roux to a blonde roux. After the blonde roux, we get into the territory of a brown roux. Now, it's important when you're doing roux is to keep it going. You don't want to go check your mail, your email. You got to stay like right here. It's like risotto or polenta, right? Once you start, don't leave it. Now, you'll start to see that it will begin to start browning around the edges of the pan. That's actually where it's hottest. Now, this will take a little bit of time, but you can't rush it. And at one point, it'll start to brown a lot faster. See, it's starting to brown a lot faster, but it smells different. This actually smells nutty. And you can see that is peanut butter. At that point, just add it in there. Whoop. Give it a whisk around to make sure that there's no roux stuck on the bottom. And then reduce the heat just a little bit, so that way you don't have to stand here constantly. But you do want to whisk it frequently because you still have flour in here. And you run the risk, right, anytime you've got flour in anything, liquid like this, of scorching on the bottom of the pot. So this is going to come to a boil. It's going to thicken, and you will notice, though, that it won't be incredibly thick. So I'm going to bring this to a boil, and I'm going to be whisking it frequently, and then at that point I'll see what the consistency is like, and then we'll correct if needed. Okay, the gravy's come to a boil, rolling boil, and you can check the consistency, right? That's like a really nice sauce consistency, right? That's absolutely, for me anyway, perfect for a sauce. But for gravy, you want it a little thicker. So we're going to go ahead, but not now, add a little bit of potato starch. But what you do want to do is, whether you're adding mushrooms or not, is at this point, start skimming. And it's important, though, to let this cook. Not just because it's thickened and come to a boil doesn't mean it's done. So you got to make sure that this cooks long enough for all those little granules of flour to pretty much explode and absorb as much liquid as they can. It will get thicker as we go on, but I'm letting you know now, because at this point, because we are using mushrooms, I'm going to put mushrooms in at this point. That way the mushrooms and the gravy have time to, you know, network and mingle and get to know each other and hang out. And was it the sum is larger than its parts? You don't want to put them in at the very end. Just put that in there. Now see, I told you, it looked like there was going to be a ton of mushrooms. It's really not that much. That was 2 pounds, by the way. You can actually trick people and say, yeah, there's gizzards in there. Ooh! Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put the lid on it, and I'm going to let that simmer for about a half hour. And at that point, it's pretty much done. The only thing you need to do is check for the consistency, and if it's thick enough, great. If it's not, we just add a little bit of potato starch and we're ready to serve.